The stars were quiet that day, and the void between them seemed deeper than ever before and darker than anything the alien crew had seen in many years of travel and war and exploration and silence. The ship, named Threxel, drifted slowly near the edge of a dead system where the light from nearby stars barely reached, and the gravity felt strange, as if something ancient still lived there and refused to die. Commander Virex stood in the center of the control deck with his long arms crossed behind his back and his tall frame wrapped in a high-collar uniform marked with symbols of victories and scars of past battles and shadows of things no one dared to name. His crew worked quietly around him, tapping on glowing panels and whispering reports to each other and staring at screens filled with static and strange readings and empty space. One of the junior officers broke the silence with a voice that trembled just enough to be noticed and said, "Commander, we are picking up something ahead." And it is big. Virex turned slowly and looked at the main screen, and there it was, a shape in the dark like a sleeping beast, a mountain of metal floating still and cold and silent like a tomb. No lights, no motion, no heat, no signals, no signs of life, just a massive object resting between two shattered moons and half hidden by the dust clouds that circled the dead planet nearby. The crew leaned forward, eyes wide, breathing shallow. The screen zoomed in, and the shape became clearer, long and wide, with heavy armor and strange angles that made it look more like a weapon than a ship and more like a threat than a mystery. Commander Virex narrowed his eyes and asked, "Is it natural or built?" And the science officer replied, "It is built, sir, and very old." "Scan it," the commander ordered without turning away, and the words hung in the air for a moment before the crew obeyed and sent the first wave of scanning energy toward the silent ship. In the corner of the deck, a lower-ranked crewman, barely more than a child, whispered to no one in particular, "That looks human." His words were ignored by most and forgotten by some, but not by the ship. The scanners touched the hull of the object and bounced back with strange results. The metal was unlike any known alloy, and the shape was unfamiliar, and the ship had no clear power source, and yet something about it felt alive. The scanning beams continued and dug deeper through the outer layers and into the inner structure of the object, and the crew began to frown and tilt their heads and mutter numbers that made no sense. This ship had weapons, and lots of them, hidden under its shell and tucked between its engines and layered through its core, and more advanced than anything the aliens had seen before. Commander Virex raised one eyebrow and asked, "Could it still be active?" And the science officer hesitated before answering, "Unlikely, sir, but possible." Before anyone could say more, the lights on the Threxel flickered just once, like a breath being held, and then the air turned colder. A low sound came from the walls, a kind of deep humming that had no source and no end, and seemed to vibrate inside the bones of the crew and make their eyes water. "Is that?" someone asked, and no one answered, because no one knew and no one wanted to say it. Commander Virex took one step toward the screen and stared harder at the silent ship, and something in his mind whispered, "Turn back." But he did not turn back. He never did, and he ordered a second scan, and this time a stronger one, and the crew obeyed, even though their fingers shook and their eyes darted around the room. The second scan hit the ship, and something hit back. The screens on the Threxel went black for half a second, then returned with red warnings and sharp alarms. The scanners shorted out, the data streams exploded into static, and the temperature dropped by 10 degrees in 2 seconds. "Sir," said the engineering officer, "we are getting interference from the target ship, and it is affecting our core systems." Commander Virex opened his mouth to respond, but a new sound filled the room, a voice not from the Threxel, not from any speaker, and not from any living thing, but a voice cold and heavy and slow. "You should not have done that." Every crew member froze and stared at each other, and then at the screen, and then at the empty space where the sound had come from, and the voice repeated the same words with no emotion and no mercy. "You should not have done that." The main screen changed on its own and showed the ship they had scanned, and now it was not so still and not so silent, because lights were coming on all over its surface, faint red lines glowing to life in patterns that looked like blood flowing through veins. Commander Virex took a step back and whispered, "This is not a ship. This is a warning." The junior officer who had spoken earlier now looked pale and terrified and said again, "That is a human battleship, sir. It has to Beta Bridge." Of the Threxel shook slightly as if something had brushed against it, and outside the stars seemed to dim and the dark became darker, and the enemy ship grew larger on the screen, not because it moved, but because it seemed to notice them. "Sir," shouted the weapons Officer, it is powering up systems unknown energy signature building inside the hull. Commander Virex gave the order raise shields and prepare weapons, but it was already too late because the Threxel's systems were no longer theirs. Every button on the deck became cold and every panel showed only static, and the engines stopped responding and the shields remained down and the weapons stayed silent. The alien crew realized in that moment that they had made a mistake, one that could not be undone and one that would not be forgiven. They had scanned something sacred, something lost, something forgotten by time, but not by the ship itself, and the ship was awake now, and it remembered everything. The Threxel floated in silence as the ancient battleship turned slightly, just slightly enough to show it was not dead and not broken and not afraid. In the stillness of space, the two ships faced each other, and one of them had already decided what would happen next. And deep in the darkness beyond the stars, something listened and waited and smiled without a mouth. The bridge of the alien ship Threxel was now filled with low beeping sounds, sharp warning signals, and rising fear that no one dared to speak about. Commander Virex stared at the screen in front of him and felt something he had not felt in many years of battle and command and cold logic. He felt watched. The human ship still floated, without moving, without weapons firing, without anything that looked like an attack, but every instinct in his body was screaming that danger was not coming. It was already here. The science officer tried once more to make sense of the readings, but the numbers were wrong, the energy patterns were unknown, and the language showing up in the data was not even alien. It was human and ancient, and it was rewriting itself inside their system. The crew watched as their control panels changed colors, shifted symbols, and showed codes no one had ever seen before. The weapons officer reached for the emergency override, trying to activate the shields manually, but his screen turned black and then showed a single line written in red glowing letters. "You scanned us." His hand froze above the panel, and his breath caught in his throat, as if the message was directed at him alone, and as if the ship somehow knew who he was and what he was thinking. The engines officer shouted, "Commander, the main reactor is being drained. Something is pulling power from our systems, and we cannot shut it off." Commander Virex moved quickly to the central console and tried to cut the connection, but the buttons no longer worked, and the console replied with a calm voice that was not theirs. "Connection secured by Terran Defense Protocol 001. The name struck everyone on the bridge with full force, because that was not just any name. That was a phrase from the old war, a phrase from stories they thought were myths. Terran Defense Protocol 001 was said to be the final code of human warships during the Great Collapse, the last failsafe designed to activate if humans were ever fully defeated or erased. But humanity was not supposed to be gone, and the ship was not supposed to be active, and yet here it was responding, as if the war never ended. The second scan had been stronger and deeper and faster than the first one, and it had touched something buried under the surface, something alive, or something programmed to act as if it were alive, and now that thing had reached back. The crew of the Threxel could feel it now, a presence like a hand pressing against their minds, not with thoughts or words, but with memory. Suddenly, every screen on the bridge flashed white, and then images began to appear, not just data, but scenes, recordings, moments of a war they never lived through, and yet they could see it all. They saw Earth burning under alien skies. They saw human ships diving into battles against fleets 10 times their size. They saw planets turn to ash, and they saw one ship always surviving, always fighting, always watching. That ship was the one they had just scanned, and now the images focused on its name written in a harsh, proud language. The screen showed a final message spoken by a human admiral, his face covered in scars, his eyes filled with something more than hate, something like sorrow or purpose or a promise. "This ship is bound by Terran command to protect the memory of our kind. If you see it, then know that we are not gone. We are waiting. We are watching. We are ready." And then the image vanished. Silence fell over the bridge again, but it was not peace. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm, before a scream, before a decision that cannot be taken back. Commander Virex spoke quietly, almost to himself. "We woke it." No one responded, because they knew it was true, and they also knew that waking it was not the worst thing they had done. They had scanned it deeply and forcefully, and that meant they had violated something sacred, something left behind with intention and power. One of the crew members asked softly, "Sir, what do we do now?" And for a long moment Virex had no answer. The ship Revenant remained still, but now its weapons ports were open and glowing dimly. Its engines were lighting up like a sleeping beast stretching its arms after a long slumber, and its sensors were all aimed directly at them. The science officer began shaking his head and said, "Sir, its energy levels are rising exponentially. I do not even know how it is doing that. It has no clear reactor." The light inside the Threxel started flickering again, and a strange pulse ran through the floor like a heartbeat, and the gravity inside the ship shifted slightly, as if something massive had just moved nearby. Commander Virex turned to his comms officer and said, "Send a message now, full broadcast. Apologize. Identify us. Say, we meant no harm. Say, we come in peace." The comms officer tried, but the system refused to send anything, and instead it replied again in the same cold voice. "Peace was an option you refused." That message was not a recording, it was a live response, and it meant only one thing: the Revenant was not just awake, it was thinking. The crew began to panic now. Whispers turned into shouts. Officers ran between stations trying to find control over systems that no longer listened. Engines flickered. Shields sparked, weapons refused to arm, and navigation spun in circles. They were trapped outside. The Revenant shifted again, this time clearly moving, not rushing forward, not firing, just slowly turning until its massive hull faced them completely. Like a giant eye staring directly into their hearts, the structure of the human ship was terrifying up close, with armor that looked grown rather than built, and lights that pulsed like veins under skin, and a front section shaped like a jaw filled with weapons older than any known design, but somehow more powerful than anything in the alien fleet. Commander Virex stood still in the center of chaos, watching the screen and thinking of every story he had dismissed, every warning he had ignored, every instinct he had pushed away. He had spent his life chasing the unknown, the forgotten, the broken, and now he had found something that was never meant to be found, and he had touched it, and it had responded. The weapons officer shouted again, "Sir, weapons online, but ours not." Theirs. Commander Virex turned slowly and said, "No, do not fire. If we fire, we die. And if we do not fire, maybe we live." The Revenant did not move closer, but the energy around it continued to grow, and now strange lights began to form between its weapons, a shape like a spiral, a spinning ring of light that made no sound, but pulled the eyes of every crew member toward it. "Sir," said the science officer, "I think it is scanning us back, but not just our ship, our minds, our thoughts, our language. It is learning." Commander Virex clenched his hands behind his back and whispered, "Then we better show it we mean no harm." But even as he said it, he knew those words were too late. The Revenant had already decided, and now it was only a question of what would come next. The alien ship, Threxel, now floated helpless in the cold silence of space, while facing something that did not belong in this time and did not follow the rules of this galaxy anymore. The human battleship Revenant had not moved far, but its presence now filled the stars like a silent wave pressing against every wall, every screen, and every breath the alien crew could take. Commander Virex stood frozen at the center of the control deck, his thoughts racing through memories and training and regret and warnings he had chosen not to listen. Toa message came again across every screen, not in words, but in pulses of light and rhythm, and thought you touched what should have been left alone. The gravity shifted again inside the Threxel, now slightly pulling toward the Revenant, not strong, not violent, but steady, like a hand wrapping around the ship and holding it in place. The weapons officer tried again to activate their defenses, but nothing responded. The buttons lit up with human symbols. The screens showed only one phrase again and again and again: "This is your lesson." Commander Virex ordered. The engines restarted, but the crew had already tried. The systems were dead, as if the heart of the ship had been removed without leaving a mark. The Revenant began to glow now, with a soft red light running across its long, scarred hull, like veins pulsing with slow, steady power, not rushed, not angry, just patient and certain. The alien crew began to panic again, some shouting, some praying, some just sitting in silence, staring at the ancient human ship and wondering what it was thinking and what it would do next. Then everything changed in a single breath. Every screen on the Threxel lit up with white light and then displayed a vision, not a video, not a hologram, but a shared memory pushed into their minds without asking, without warning. They saw Earth, but not as they had imagined it. It was not green and blue and peaceful. It was burning under alien skies, cities falling, oceans boiling, and skies filled with fire and pain. They saw ships like the Revenant fighting above the clouds, surrounded and outnumbered, but never retreating. They saw humans not as weak creatures, but as warriors with eyes full of fury and hands building machines that should not have existed. They saw the birth of the Revenant, built in silence, built in secret, built as a last answer to a war already lost. They saw its mission to wait, to watch, to protect the last memory of a fallen people, and then the vision faded, and the crew was left shaking and sweating and staring at each other with fear that went deeper than logic. Commander Virex looked around the bridge and saw officers who had once laughed at human myths now pale and silent and broken by something older than truth. The Revenant moved slightly, now rotating until its weapons pointed directly at the Threxel, not blinking, not hesitating, just showing what it could do if it chose to, and still, it did not fire. Instead, another signal came this time. A deep vibration through the hull of the alien ship, not loud, not violent, just clear like a heartbeat. The Threxel began to spin slowly, losing control, as if the space around it no longer followed physics, no longer cared about its engines or its command. "Sir," shouted the navigation officer, "we are being pulled into a fixed rotation. Our ship is no longer in control." Commander Virex shouted back, "Can we break free?" And the answer was already known. The systems were dead, and nothing could move outside. The Revenant grew brighter, as if charging something, but still waiting, and still watching, and still deciding. The crew now began to speak in quiet voices, asking questions that had no answers. What does it want? Why has it not destroyed us? Can we reason with Itis, it even alive? And then the lights flickered once more, and the main screen changed. Now they saw the face of a human, not the one from before, but a new one, a younger one, a woman with dark eyes and a voice filled with something worse than anger, disappointment. "You were warned," the voice said, "not with hate, but with deep sorrow. The Revenant is not a weapon, it is a memory, and you tried to break it open like a box to steal secrets not meant for you. You thought us extinct, you thought us weak, you thought we were nothing but ruins and stories, but we remember everything." Commander Virex stepped forward and said to the screen, "We meant no harm. We did not understand. We are explorers, not enemies." The face on the screen stared back without blinking, and then replied, "You scanned us without asking. You woke us without care. You reached into a grave and demanded treasure. Now you learn what is buried does not always stay asleep." The screen vanished, and the Revenant powered up fully, and its weapons lit with a glow that made space itself seem to pull away from it. Commander Virex gave the only order left: brace for impact, but nothing came. Instead, a wave of energy passed through the Threxel, not heat, not fire, not sound, but a pulse that reached into the minds of the crew. Each of them saw something personal, a memory, a fear, a loss from their own past, and then saw it burn away. They screamed, but not from pain, from something deeper, change. When the wave passed, they were still alive, but changed inside, as if the Revenant had seen their souls and shown them something they did not want to see. Ship systems restarted slowly, lights returning, engines humming softly, weapons inactive, but functional again. Commander Virex looked at the data and saw that the Revenant had released control. The human ship now drifted away, not retreating, just returning to silence. The final message appeared on screen, written in red: "You are spared, but you will remember." The Threxel remained in place for hours, not moving, not speaking, just floating near the ancient human ghost that had judged them and let them go. And when they finally turned their ship around and prepared to leave the dead system, the crew knew they would never speak of this again, not because they were ordered, but because they could not. How do you explain meeting something that should not exist? How do you describe being forgiven by a ghost? How do you tell others that you scanned a sleeping god and lived as the Revenant disappeared into the darkness? Once more, the stars seemed to grow colder, and the silence around them grew heavier. And in that silence, one thought echoed inside every member of the crew: we should never have scanned that ship. The Threxel moved slowly through the stars, its hull still cold from the encounter, its systems just beginning to respond again, as if waking from a nightmare. It could not understand. Inside the ship, the crew spoke in hushed voices, their faces pale, their hearts unsteady, their minds haunted by the thing they had seen and touched and survived. Commander Virex stood alone at the front of the bridge, staring into the dark screen that had once shown them a sleeping wreck, but now showed nothing but empty space. The Revenant was gone. It had returned to silence. It had left them alive. It had left them changed. The commander turned to his science officer and said, "Bring up everything in the database related to that ship. Search for anything on Terran war records, lost vessels, old battle logs. Find me something that can explain what just happened." The science officer worked quickly, hands moving across the console, pulling up hidden files, old fragments, encrypted stories half buried beneath Centuries of peace and silence. Then he found it. It was not a full report, not a clean file, not something placed there by order. It was a broken stream of notes stitched together from captured memories and decoded signals and the dying words of soldiers who never made it home, and it told the story of the Arvand. It was built in the final years of the Terran Wars, when Earth was falling, when colonies were burning, when hope was no longer a plan, but a whisper passed between soldiers in dark rooms. In broken ships, the Revenant was never meant to return to Earth. It was never meant to dock or resupply or rest. It was a last command forged by a dying people, a ship made not just of metal, but of memory, of vengeance, of purpose. Its mission was simple, but terrifying: to wait, to watch, to survive, to ensure that if Earth and all her children ever vanished from the stars, something would remain, something that could speak for them, something that could protect the truth. The Revenant was launched from a forgotten base at the edge of the Orion sector under a false signal meant to distract the enemy fleets. It vanished into deep space before the base itself was destroyed, taking with it the last hope of a species that knew it might not see the next dawn. It was equipped with experimental weapons and armor forged from materials stolen from dying suns and collapsing worlds. Its AI was unlike any created before. A learning mind fed not just data, but emotion, culture, poetry, history, pain, and love. It was designed to evolve not just in function, but in soul. The logs revealed that the Revenant had been involved in at least 4 battles after its launch, each time emerging from deep space to strike without warning, to protect something, to defend someone, to answer a cry. Each time it appeared, it left behind silence, wreckage, and a single message: we remember. And it would vanish again into the dark. But at some point long after the war was declared over and the galaxy believed the humans to be gone, the Revenant stopped responding. Its signals faded, its sightings ended, and its name became a ghost. Some said it had been destroyed, others believed it had fulfilled its mission and gone dark forever. A few believed it never existed at all, just a legend made by frightened survivors. Now the crew of the Threxel knew the truth. It was real, it was still out there, and it was still watching. The science officer looked up from the screen, his face pale, his voice quiet, as he said, "This ship we scanned, it was not just a relic, it was a guardian, a warning, a grave, and a sword waiting to be drawn again." Commander Virex said quietly, "Then we disturbed something holy. We opened a door we should have left closed." The crew stood in silence around him, each remembering the voice, the visions, the pulse of energy that had shown them not just the end of a people, but the fire they carried into the dark. One of the junior officers stepped forward, holding a new data file recovered from the Revenant's final transmission. It was not part of the threat or the memory. It was a list, names, hundreds of names: soldiers, civilians, children, record of the last lives lost in the war. Each name paired with a location, a date, a final note. It was a memorial encoded into the ship's final memory cycle, played only when awakened by an outsider, as if to say, "Remember us not for our weapons, but for who we were." Commander Virex read the names aloud. For a moment, his voice steady and quiet, and the crew listened in silence. Not because they were ordered, but because they knew something sacred was being spoken. This was not just a ship, it was a story, a promise, and a scar. He closed the file and looked around at his crew, no longer thinking of them as explorers or warriors or scientists, but as witnesses to something older and deeper than their mission. He said, "We will report this, but only to the Council. No open channels, no shared files, no broadcasts. We protect this knowledge not because it is dangerous, but because it is sacred." The crew nodded in agreement, some with tears in their eyes, others with hands shaking. Outside the ship, the stars still shined the same, and the darkness remained as deep as ever, but something had changed in the hearts of those who had looked into the eyes of the past and seen it look back. The Revenant had returned to sleep, or perhaps it had never been awake at all. Perhaps it had only responded as it was meant to. Perhaps it was not done yet. The Threxel turned its course slowly, heading away from the dead system, where it had met the ghost ship, where it had been judged, and where it had been forgiven. The sensors showed nothing behind them, no movement, no energy, no sign of the human ship, but the silence felt heavier now, and the stars seemed to listen. And deep in the dark, far beyond where the Threxel could see, the Revenant drifted once more into shadow, its lights fading, its weapons resting, its heart still burning, waiting, watching, remembering, and promising that no matter how many years passed, no matter how many civilizations rose and fell, the story of Earth would not be forgotten, not while it still breathed, not while it still remembered, not while it still waited in the dark. The Threxel moved through space in silence, its engines slow and uncertain, its systems running but not trusted by the crew, who now treated their own ship as if it could turn against them at any moment. They had seen the revenant they had touched it with scanners and felt it respond, and they had survived somehow, not because they deserved it, but because the ancient human ship had allowed them to walk away, or so they believed. But space is never empty, and silence is never safe. As the Threxel drifted away from the dead system, the crew began to notice something wrong. The stars outside the window seemed to shift slightly, as if they were not where they should be. The gravity inside the ship pulsed just once, like a distant heartbeat, and the cold returned, not the normal cold of space, but the same cold they had felt when the Revenant first awoke. Commander Virex stood on the bridge, his hands behind his back, his eyes on the dark glass ahead, trying to understand what his instincts already knew. They were not alone. The science officer checked the sensors again and again, each time shaking his head and saying the same thing: there is nothing there. But the crew could feel it, a weight, a pressure, a presence that made every step feel heavier. Every sound seemed louder and every shadow darker. The engine's officer reported that their fuel consumption was rising even though their speed remained slow, as if the ship was fighting something unseen. The navigation team said their maps were drifting, their coordinates shifting by tiny margins that made no sense, like space itself was bending slightly around them. Commander Virex turned and ordered a full system check, and every console lit up with soft blue light, ready to obey. And then, just for a second, the lights turned red. Only for a second, but it was enough. That was the same red used by the same red that had filled their screens before the voice spoke, before their minds were touched, before their ship had been turned into a classroom. The crew now whispered more often, their voices unsure, their steps quiet, as if afraid to wake something, even though they were already awake and already being watched. Then the comms officer shouted, and everyone turned toward him. "Sir, we are receiving a signal." Virex walked over slowly and asked, "Is it human?" The officer nodded, but not with confidence, with fury. "Sir, it is human, and it is coming from ahead, not behind." That made no sense. The Revenant was behind them in the system they had left, so how could a signal come from the front? The screen flickered again, and a new image appeared, but it was not the it was another ship, smaller, older, even more damaged, drifting, burning, but still transmitting a message. A human voice, broken and distorted, speaking a loop: "Help us. This is the vessel Beacon 7. We are under attack. Repeat, help us. This is Beacon 7. We are under attack." The voice cracked with static, then looped again. Commander Virex asked, "When was this recording made?" The science officer ran the voice print through translation and signal dating tools and looked up with wide eyes. "Sir, this message is 312 years old." The crew fell silent again. It was impossible, and yet it was real. A ship lost in time, calling for help from the past. The screen zoomed in and showed the ship called Beacon 7, its hull torn open, its engines dead, its crew long gone. But something was moving near it, something big. Commander Virex leaned forward and narrowed his eyes, enhanced the feed. The screen shifted and cleared, and there it was, the somehow ahead of them, somehow waiting, and not alone. The Revenant floated near the broken ship, as if guarding it or remembering it, and surrounding them were fragments of other ships, not Terra, not Threxel, but unknown, twisted metal, blackened armor, strange shapes melted by heat and time, the remains of an ancient battle. And the Revenant had not left. It had stayed watching over the ruins like a sentinel made of memory and rage. The crew of the Threxel watched in silence and fear. They had escaped the Revenant once, or so they thought, but now it was ahead of them in a place it should not be. If time meant nothing to Idas, if space could not hold Idas, if purpose gave it more power than physics ever could. The lights on the Threxel dimmed again, the engines dropped by 20% power. Without warning, the screens flickered, and then every panel lit up with red again. Same as before, same words, same presence. Connection secured. Terran Defense Protocol 001 active. You returned. The ship had not followed them. It had waited for them, planned for them, pulled them toward this place. And now the lesson was not over. Commander Virex shouted, "Reverse course, full speed, get us out of here now." But the engines did not respond. The crew tried manual overrides, emergency procedures, escape protocols. Nothing worked. They were caught, not by weapons, not by force, but by something deeper. The Revenant was not attacking them. It was holding them in place, teaching. Again, another screen opened. This time, it showed Beacon 7, not in ruin, but whole, alive, the same ship as before, but with people moving inside. Ida, recording from the past, they watched as Beacon 7 was ambushed by alien ships of unknown origin, weapons Fired screams, heard explosions, shaking the hull, then silence. Then the Revenant arrived. It entered the battle, without warning, without orders, without support. It destroyed every enemy ship. Within moments, weapons glowing with power far beyond what should be possible. Then it docked with Beacon 7, tried to save the crew. Some survived, some did not. The message that had reached them 3 centuries later had been recorded by one of the last survivors, a girl no older than 12, whispering into a cracked transmitter, "Please remember us." Then the screen went black. The crew of the Threxel stood silent again, their hearts breaking in ways they could not explain. They had expected a warship. What they had found was a graveyard, a guardian, a memory made of steel. In sorrow, the lights on the Threxel returned to normal. Engines responded again. Navigation showed clear paths. But now the Revenant was behind them, once more, not moving, not chasing, just watching, letting them go again. But this time they knew the truth. It had never been about warning them. It had been about showing them what war leaves behind, what sacrifice looks like, what it means to protect something so deeply you would wait forever in silence for the chance to do it again. Commander Virex looked at his crew and saw their eyes. They were not just afraid. They were changed, not by force, but by knowing, by understanding. The Revenant was not just alive, it was awake, and it was choosing who would carry its story. As the Threxel turned away and began to leave the place where time had folded and history had returned, the crew made no sound. The silence was now a kind of respect, a kind of promise, and as they moved back into the stars, one final message came through, spoken not in voice but in memory. "We remember." The Threxel ship drifted silently through the dark corridors of space, the crew barely speaking, the stars outside glowing like scattered embers. The silence inside was not fear anymore, it was reflection, it was grief. It was awe. Commander Virex sat in his quarters alone, the dim light casting long shadows across the walls, his eyes locked on the frozen screen that still showed the final words from the Revenant. The last message had not been made of sound, but memory. "We remember." That was all it echoed inside him like a drum that never stopped beating. He stood and walked slowly through the ship. The metal beneath his boots seemed heavier than before. The doors opened without resistance. The lights followed him softly, as if even the Threxel ship understood the weight of what they had seen. In the mess hall, several officers sat in silence, their meals untouched, their faces pale. No one made a joke, no one asked for music. The usual arguments over protocols and politics had vanished like smoke. Virex passed by them and walked to the observation deck, where the stars looked so bright, so still, and yet so unfamiliar. He raised a hand and touched the glass, as if hoping to feel something on the other side, something that made sense, something that explained how a ship lost in history had reached into their minds and hearts without a single weapon being fired. Then the door opened behind him, and Science Officer Velan stepped in. His face more tired than before, his uniform wrinkled, his eyes not meeting the commander's at first. "Sir, we have found something." Virex turned slowly, his expression calm but alert. "What is it?" Velan took a deep breath and motioned for the commander to follow him back to the data room. There they passed rows of blinking consoles and screens, still replaying the encounter data, still processing signal patterns, still trying to decode what had no code. Velan pointed to one screen that showed the same transmission again, the one from Beacon 7, the last cry for help. But this time something new had been found. Beneath the voice, beneath the static, beneath the desperate words of the child, there was another layer, a hidden signal buried deep, encrypted with a method no Threxel system recognized. "We only caught it because of a pattern glitch. The voice had a delay. We tried to fix it, and this came out." Velan hit a command, and a new screen appeared. This time the message was visual. It showed schematics, not of Beacon 7, but of something else, something larger, older, more complex. It was the RNA, but not the version they saw. This was a design plan of the ship before it was ever deployed. Human words lined the edges of the screen, and Velan explained that translation was still incomplete, but one word repeated again and again: memory, over and over. Memory, not weapon, not war, not vengeance. Memory. Commander Virex leaned in closer, his eyes scanning every line, every wire, every system shown in the blueprint. It was not just a warship, it was something more, maybe a vault, maybe a recorder, maybe a tomb, maybe all of them. The Revenant had been built not just to fight, but to remember. The ship had kept its purpose long after the war had ended, long after the species that built it had vanished, and now it had passed that memory to them without asking, without force, but with precision and power. Velan said softly, "The signal contains more data, but we need time to decode it." Virex nodded, then gave the order work in shifts, no interruptions, keep this secure, no word of this leaves. The ship until I say so. Velan nodded and walked away. The commander stayed behind, staring at the screen as the lines of the Revenant pulsed slowly like a heart beating in silence. Somewhere deep inside the Threxel ship, a hum began, soft, steady, unknown. And then a panel lit up in the engineering bay where no one had touched it. A storage core that had been empty before now flickered to life. Engineers rushed to check it and found that it was downloading something, data from nowhere, not from any outside signal. It was as if the ship itself was now receiving memory. They traced it to a point in the hull, a spot that had never been opened that now glowed faint. Redone engineer touched it and felt a pulse like a whisper in his skin, and the red glow vanished inside. They found a chip, old, not Threxel, not alien Terran. How had it gotten there? No explanation, no breach, no contact, and yet it was there, carefully placed, gently embedded, waiting. When they brought it to the commander and plugged it into isolation systems, it activated. Immediately a voice spoke, calm, neutral, human memory, core 3 of 12 activated, begin file. The screen showed images, not battle, not death, but life. Children playing in the halls of a colony, a couple planting a tree on a red world, a teacher writing on a board, a medic helping a wounded soldier smile, moments of peace, fragments of joyous civilization, not known for its weapons, but for what it had tried to protect. And this was only one memory, core only one of 12. The Revenant had not been built to carry weapons alone. It had been built to carry a culture, a soul, the soul of a lost people, and now it was leaving pieces behind to be found, to be shared, to be remembered. Virex sat again in silence, watching the screen as the faces of humans long gone smiled and laughed and lived. He felt something strange inside his chest, not funnet sorrow, something like hope, or it may be guilt that he had seen them only as threats until now. He gave the next order with a voice that did not shake, prepare for return trajectory. We are going back. Officers protested softly, sir, what if the Revenant does not allow us to leave again? Virex turned and said, we are not going to leave, we are going to listen. The crew obeyed. The ship turned, engines warmed. They re-entered the region of space where the Revenant waited. This time, the ancient ship did not react with silence or pressure or cold. It simply opened its signal again, and data poured in. The Threxel ship did not fight it. They accepted the flow, not understanding it all, but knowing it mattered each hour. New memories arrived, files, images, letters, songs, blueprints, logs of laughter and arguments and love. An entire lost world, piece by piece. In the next few days, 12 cores were recovered, each hidden in a different part of their ship, each awakening on its own, each delivering more of the past, more of what the Revenant had sworn to keep safe. The crew changed. Some began to speak the old Terran words without knowing how. Some dreamed of cities they had never seen. One officer woke, crying, saying she remembered a star that never rose, but was always warm. These were not just stories, they were imprints. The Revenant was not only remembering, it was making them remember too. Commander Virex stood again on the observation deck, this time joined by Velan. They watched as the Revenant slowly moved for the first time in weeks. It passed them without force, without threat, then paused and opened a final signal. The screen showed a single image, a group of human children looking up at the stars behind them, the outline of a battleship, not to fight but to guard, to carry, to remember. Then the image faded and the Revenant was gone, not in speed, not in stealth, just gone, as if it had never been. And yet they knew better. They carried its story now, they carried its memory, and something deep inside them said they always would. The Threxel ship turned once more toward home, but it would never be the same. Not a single step would feel the same, not a single word would hold the same weight. They were no longer explorers, they were now witnesses, and maybe someday they would become memory too. The central chamber of the Galactic Senate stood quiet. That day, the kind of silence that even war could not bring, the kind of silence that made the air feel heavier, as if time itself held its breath. The spiral towers of the ancient council glistened under twin suns, but no voice echoed from the floor where thousands of species once argued and roared and made their case for power. On this day, the Threxel ship approached slowly, not escorted, not threatened, but watched by every sensor in every direction. Its transmission was already received, its contents already spreading like wildfire through every encrypted network, not because of fear, but because of what it carried: memory, raw, unfiltered, undistorted, human memory. Commander Virex stood before the primary landing gate, dressed in ceremonial black, his officers behind him. The cores carried in crystal vaults, guarded not by weapons, but by oath. They had come not to demand, not to accuse, not to warn. They had come to share. When the doors opened and the Threxel stepped into the light of the chamber. All eyes turned to them. Thousands of representatives leaned forward, curious, skeptical, unsure of what the predator race had brought that could matter more than politics, more than trade. More than ancient rivalries that never died. The Threxel spoke, no words. Instead, Velan stepped forward and activated the first vault. A soft blue shimmer formed in the air, and then, without introduction, the memory began. Children again, not screaming in panic, but playing in open grass under soft sky, their voices overlapping with laughter in a language long forgotten by most, but universal in its sound. Piece. Then teachers explaining history not of war, but of stars, of science, of ideas. Then artists painting their dreams on canvas and walls, and ships that once carried explorers, not soldiers. Then a medic holding a dying soldier's hand as he whispered a name that never returned home. Then silence. The projection ended, but no one moved. Velan activated the second vault, and this time the images came slower, clearer. A city built in the rings of a gas giant, its lights dancing like music across clouds. A mother telling her child bedtime stories about the oceans of Europe. Small wedding held in the ruins of a war that had nearly erased them all hope. The third vault showed the first blueprint of the Revenant, designed not to conquer, but to preserve, not to fight, but to carry everything a species loved, everything it feared, everything it hoped. By the time the fourth vault opened, many delegates no longer sat upright, their bodies leaning forward, as if drawn by gravity older than their own history. Then the seventh vault showed the war, not from command centers, not from statistics, not from battles won, but from the eyes of a mechanic who watched a friend vanish, and fire from the tears of a pilot who fired at a target and realized it was empty, from a field medic who used her last breath to save a child. From both sides, and then again silenced. Threxel said still nothing, but their presence now felt different. No longer a warning, no longer feared. Instead, they looked like messengers who had walked too long, carrying too much, too heavy to speak. It was the Archon delegate who stood first, a species made of crystals and flame, their voice vibrating across the hall with sharp clarity. This is not weaponry. This is not technology. This is not threat. This is history. This is truth. Others began to speak. The Salari, who once clashed with the humans over mining lanes, now looked down, unable to meet the gaze of the projection. The Vixari, who once warned that humans were chaos, now whispered that maybe chaos had always been misunderstood. The Zrak Council, who remembered human kindness during a plague on their moons, asked softly why no one had tried to preserve their stories. Then the ninth vault opened. A single letter written by a dying commander to his daughter. He apologized for the time he missed, for the birthdays he never came home, for the stories he never told her. He said he fought not because he hated, but because he had loved her, loved his world, loved the sky that gave them dreams. And in the end, he asked only one thing: that someone remember when the vault closed. Some delegates wept, not all, not many, but enough. The Threxel then spoke, not Virex, not Velan, but a young ensign barely of age, his voice soft, his posture unsure, but his words carved into the chamber like fire through ice. We came to kill this ship. When we found it, we thought it was a trap, a weapon, a ghost. We tried to escape it, we tried to understand it, but the ship never fired, it never threatened, it simply remembered. And when we touched it, it remembered us too, not to destroy, but to share. The Senate asked what he meant, and Velan responded, the Revenant chose us not because we were worthy, but because we were there, because memory must be passed, even to those who never asked for it, especially to them. The Grand Speaker stood finally, their face unreadable, their voice a whisper stretched across the minds of billions watching from every world. Why now? Why share this now? Virex answered, because it would be wrong to keep it, because it would be betrayal to hide it, because the humans deserved more than silence. Because we are not the same anymore. We cannot. Beta memory changed us, and it should change you. The last vault, open vault, 12. No images, only sound, the hum of a cradle in space, the voice of a young human singing a lullaby. No translation, no context, just the raw sound of a child singing into a recorder for her father, who left for war. Her voice cracked once, then she laughed, and the recording ended. No explosions, no speeches, just a child's love. When the Threxel finished and left the vaults behind, the Senate did not move for hours. Debates did not begin. Votes were not called. Instead, memory lingered in the walls. Across the next cycles, something shifted on distant colonies. Art installations were created using fragments of Terran songs. A new archive was established orbiting the neutral moon of Kairos, a vault not for weapons, But for Lost Voices, delegates began requesting memory recordings from their own pasts, old wars, old loves, old worlds, swallowed by silence. The Threxel ship was never attacked. Again, no one dared. It had carried the weight of ghosts and delivered them. Without violence, news channels across the spiral arms replayed the vaults. Children wrote essays about humanity. Poets began to call them the lost flame. Teachers taught the lullaby. Even though no one knew what the words meant, because it felt right, because it felt alive in the outer edges of space where pirates once ruled, even smugglers paused when hearing the recordings, because even they had memories, because everyone carries a vault inside, and some just need the key. The Revenant was never seen again, but its fragments appeared like seeds. 12 cores, now 30 in comets, in old wreckage, in forgotten satellites, each one activated when found, each one different. Each one human galaxies began to collect them, not to own but to remember, because for the first time since the silence of old wars they understood what remembrance meant. Not victory, not loss, but the space in between, where real life happens, where people breathe and break and hope. The Threxel returned to their homeworlds, no longer only warriors, but now keepers, ambassadors of memory. Their young began to write their own vaults, not to compete, but to join, because memory once shared does not divide, it multiplies. In the deepest center of the Senate chamber, a statue was built, not of a warrior, not of a hero, but of a girl singing a lullaby, eyes closed, smiling, one hand holding a tiny recorder, the other reaching to the stars, and beneath her one word carved in every tongue: remember.